Hey, this is Drew, and you're watching the GTM Generalist podcast. The start of this episode was actually inspired by a recent LinkedIn post that Emily Kramer, who's the founder and a marketer of Market One newsletter, where she talked about the past 15 years in B2B marketing. In those 15 years, she says that there were essentially 6 eras of go-to-market motions. And so it got me thinking about my ex-colleague, Alex McCachran, who has been a GTM generalist from day one. He's been 10 years in the Shopify space, building out go-to-market playbooks at the past 4 companies that he's worked at. And now he's on his 5th company within the Shopify space, building out his 5th GTM playbook. In our conversation, Alex and I break down why we believe 86% of B2B companies actually outsource their content creation instead of actually doing it in-house. Then we dive into the critical need to have a pre-sales and a post-sales teammates to have with you as you're crafting and building your strategic narrative and positioning for the company. And then Alex finally dives into his 3-suit framework that all of us generalists can use to help us do more with less as we build our own go-to-market motion and strategy. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's get into it.
And I think like that's a great jumping point, I think, for our conversation is because Emily Kramer from Market One, she said a post yesterday about the past 15 years of B2B GTM eras. And, you're 10 years plus working in ecom. And this is essentially your 5th GTM playbook that you're building here at Intelligems. And so I thought it would be really cool to dive through each of the eras that she kind of mapped out since you've been through them. And, a lot of your work's been through content. And so there's some interesting stats I pulled and read about content around how that's number one thing that's outsourced to agencies or just freelancers. And I think that's just such an interesting take because you're all in on content, and I've seen the success having worked with you, but then also what you're doing now with Intelligems, kind of that's part of your playbook. So wanted to kind of dive in there. I mean, yeah, past 10 years, ecom, walk us through how you started, and maybe we can just go one by one within each of the genres, if that's cool.
Sounds good. The 10 plus years is kind of insane that it's been a decade in the space, but it makes me feel slightly old when we refer to it like that. But yeah, let's go back through history and relive some of these. So at the very beginning, yeah, I've kind of seen all these. I don't know if I was actually intentionally building in any of these, more so than just kind of figuring shit out in each of these eras. But God, I don't even remember what year it was. But my first kind of actual real job out of college was at a company called Sweet Tooth. For those that don't know Sweet Tooth, it turned into Smile.io. There was a big rebrand that I was a part of. And that was back on the Magento days. So we were selling loyalty programs to Magento merchants, and this new up and coming thing was there, and it was called Shopify. And even that's crazy to think about that was oh yeah, that's okay, but it's nothing compared to Magento, and look where we are now. I digress. When I started there, one of the big plays, and I didn't think of this, we were already thinking about it, was content. And at that point, it was HubSpot was kind of king shit. And there was all this hey, you need to be content marketing. What is content marketing? And back 10 years ago, if you were doing content marketing, you were actually kind of against the grain. It sounds crazy to say that today, oh, you were doing of course you're doing content marketing. Everyone does content marketing, but that wasn't the playbook back then. And I think what we ended up doing was we just went really deep on written content for SEO purposes. So I think kind of the bread and butter of Smile was the blog. I should go back and talk to them. I'd be curious to hear how it's going now. But if you search anything, Shopify, points, loyalty, any combination of those things, chances are you are ending up on the Smile blog. We invested really heavily in content creation and content curation to make sure that we were top of search for that. And I know in her summary, she's talking about the self-serve and growth hacking timeline back then. I think we, in terms of a GTM motion, we were kind of doing that on the Shopify space. It was very much yeah, how do we hack these systems? I remember the Shopify app store was in its infancy, and we figured out that review volume was what was putting people to the top of the app store. So we just started to build all these different tools and all these different ways to try to get people to leave reviews. one of my biggest stories of all time was I got us delisted off of the Shopify App Store because I didn't read the partner agreement in its entirety and we were violating the terms. So they kicked us off. We got back on. But yeah, that kind of like growth hacky time, content marketing in its infancy. Yeah, man, it's crazy. Those are crazy times back then.
Yeah. I love that. And like, I think what speaks to like the growth hack aspect was more of like, that was at the age where a lot of like B2C consumer type software. And like, that's where I started to hear about growth hacking and
Yep.
be like around that. Andrew Chen, the head of growth for Uber, was kind of really talking about it and kind of building his content, and people were following that. So it was interesting to kind of see how you guys were doing growth hacky stuff in the Shopify e-commerce space. That's so funny of you that you guys got delisted. Was that like oh crap, we're like, we're done? Or was it more of like, hey, it's just going to take some time? Like you guys still had like some sales led initiatives where you're able to still bring in pipeline and deals? Like, how did you guys manage and navigate that?
I mean, I think we'll get to this when we talk about like the hybrid era, but I think like Smile was pretty hybrid always. Like because we had the Magento arm and the Shopify arm, we had this kind of sales motion, but we also had like a very strong inbound motion fed by the Shopify app listing. So we weren't completely dead in the water when we got delisted. It only lasted for 2 days. It was like, hey, just like fix one thing and we'll get you back on there. But like, I'll never forget, it was our CEO called me and I was like having Thanksgiving dinner and I'm like, why is he calling me? Canadian Thanksgiving. And I answer the phone. He's like, dude, we like check your email. Like we just got delisted from the app store. I'm like, oh my God. So like the whole holiday weekend was like, okay, like how are we going to get back on? But also at the same time, like crazy, the decision was made over like a holiday weekend. But yeah, we got it sorted. It didn't last very long.
I love that. And then, yeah, she talks about from 2014 to 2016 was like product led growth gains traction. And I think that kind of speaks to just the ecosystem of Shopify and e-commerce, right? Like we just saw so much scale in growth, so many brands and PE firms are just jumping in, trying to like get their next brand on Shopify and then just launch and get these exits that we saw with, or even just valuations that we saw with some of the early days of, Casper and Allbirds and all these other brands now. So I'm curious, like from your guys' perspective, is that how you viewed like product-led growth? It was just kind of like riding the wave of the app ecosystem of Shopify as it got popular?
Ish, but I think like we lean really heavy into PLG right in that time frame as well, where hey, I think at the time we had like, so we were using like the freemium model, like hey, get started for free. You can get started for free off of the app listing. But also all of that content that we were creating, all those blog posts also were like, hey, you want to start a loyalty program? It's free. Go here and get started and like drop people in. So like the PLG kind of like growth or viral loop component was like, hey, talk about all these things out in the market, get someone using the product, get them to successful, and then get them to be like a participant back into the content, whether that was like a case study or like just a customer highlight and get them back in there. And in her article, she talks about this concept of like marketing and product becoming fuzzy. I also remember at this time, it was like, is the website's marketing's responsibility? Is the website product's responsibility? Because these things are so like overlapped. And at the time I was like jumping out of marketing into product management. And I was like, I was basically tasked with like be in the product and like find what these upgrade triggers are going to be. So like, hey, we had a cap at like a certain amount of members on a loyalty program, but we also had all of these features that were like premium features. So, hey, the biggest one for us at the time was the free version gave you like limited styling options. And if you wanted to like really style your program up, that was on, I think it was $29 at the time. So like, it was like, how many people can we get from this free like lead gen into a $29 plan through these upgrade triggers? And like, hey, once they're there, how do we get them to the next plan? There's basically 4 plans. And my job was, hey, let's look at what the flow is looking like inside the app, where the most effective upgrade triggers happening, how long is someone on this before we start to hit them up with like, you should be on basically like, hey, Drew, you're better than the program you have. Let's give you the power you need.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, that is essentially a growth marketer. I feel like I saw another post recently, someone talking about like how people have this trend of putting in growth marketing in their title, which for me, growth marketing has been around for a while, but I've always thought about it as like you're driving growth through the product itself, not necessarily just labeling it as growth marketing because you do content or whatever. But what you're talking about is specifically that, like you're looking at the product, where are people at? And then like, how can you use the product to enable them to get to that next step? And I feel like for many people, especially for, GDM generalists, where they're just kind of like, they're wearing so many hats. How did you like start to think through the process of like, well, where do I even begin? Right. I think many times, especially now when you're creating a new playbook, it's like, where do you even start? So I'm sure there was like some foundational or fundamental, move you had or thought idea that you had to be like, okay, let's start here and grow from there. So curious, like what was your process as you thought about where to look?
Feel free to stop me here because I feel like this can go into like a full hour conversation. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. But I think like one of the most dangerous things that can happen in marketing is like you started this conversation off with like, hey, Alex, this is like your fifth rodeo. And it's very tempting to be like, something worked in the past. Let's do it again. And hey, I already done this before. I know how to do it. Let's do it again. But like when you look at this like 10 years and like how things are evolving, like there's a lot of very different strategies inside of here that are like drastically different from one another. So I think the most dangerous thing is to say, hey, this worked before, let's go do it again. But the question you should be asking, you asked, where do you start? And the question, like the answer for me is, I don't know. And you have to like work really hard to go figure out where it is that you want to start. So like every single marketer, when they come into like a new organization, especially if they're the one that's going to like build the kind of like path forward, is like, oh, the website stinks, the brand stinks, like let's go like redo everything. Don't do that. Don't be that person. I think like the most important thing to do is like really understand the product, understand the competitive position and like what's already established and there. Not necessarily that it's working, but like where are things coming from. So like IntelliGems has an app listing and has App Store flow. Fermat did not. We were not listed on the App Store. Like everything was coming in through the site. So like these channels that are at your disposal, how you fit into the minds of the customer inside of that competitive landscape, and like where are those customers hanging out? Who are you selling to? What job to be done? Get a really good understanding of that customer and then your product, and then like overlap those two things. Look at what that overlap's looking like and be like, I think that we can achieve that here, there, or there. And like pick at max 3 things and be like, let's go start there. I'm going to stop there because I could ramble on this forever. But like TLDR is competitive positioning. What is your your product positioning, competitive positioning, customer profile, and product? Overlay these things and try to figure out like, hey, the most natural path forward for us is going to be this, rather than, hey, I've done this in the past and I have a playbook for this.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, for me, but if I were to look at your track record though, it's so easy to say like, well, man, Alex been doing a podcast at almost every single one he's done. I mean, you started the podcast at Loop Returns, where we worked at. Then you started a podcast at Repeat. Then you started a podcast at Fermat. I always mispronounce that.
Vermont.
My bad. And then now you have this new podcast that you're doing at IntelliJam. So like, it's like, cool, Alex, you just said that, but like, I see you doing that same play or same strategy, implementing a podcast, let alone in, I would say, one of the most just drawn out industries where there's been so many podcasts within e-commerce. And so I'm just curious, like, now that you've said that, like, walk me through why you're doing a podcast at each of these past few companies.
So I think the best thing to say for this is like, you are a fantastic writer. I have worked with a lot of people who are great at putting pen to paper. Leo comes to mind, Alexa at Fermat. I am not one of those people. So where I shine is being able to like speak my mind, and like podcasts just lended themselves very nicely to that. I didn't have to prepare. Like people are kind of like wowed by, hey, like in the moment, what kind of like answers are you coming up with? And like, can you manage a conversation well? So the podcast wasn't necessarily that I was like, oh my God, this is the best medium known to man for 4 companies in a row. It was just like, this is easy for me. And like, hey, if I want to start getting a message out there and like start the content engine up, it was just like the most natural and easy thing for me to do. Definitely not at Loop because that was my first time doing it. And like the interesting thing is the podcasts have actually evolved. Like at Loop, I viewed it as I want people listening to this and it's going to be like a lead generator for our sales team. What I've learned from there is like it actually became a better lever for people to follow up with things rather than being like the leader. So like I thought podcasts were going to be this thing where I would go do it and it was going to pull people into Loop and they were going to go listen to it. What actually ended up happening, and I know you can attest to this, is I had all these customers and like people in the industry talking about specific things. And then we kind of would like curate it and be like, if someone has a question about this, or if a customer is talking about this particular problem or like opportunity, share this. You don't even need to share the whole episode, but like share this sound clip from this customer to build the credibility. So it became more of like a, hey, use this as like internal remarketing to customers at Loop than it was this kind of like massive lead generator for us. And over time, it's been like more of the same of that. But I actually like, to be honest, I don't really care how many people are like subscribed to the podcast or like we're using YouTube now at IntelliGems. I'm very focused on trying to like have our audience be there rather than scattered across a bunch of different places. It's like, I don't really care if it only gets like 40 views on YouTube because when I take those clips and I put them to social, it gives us something to talk about and it provides more credibility to it to break through. Like, let's just write something on LinkedIn. It's like, oh no, there's this video associated with it and you can go get more information if you want. It just is a reason to go be like out there on social more so than like, oh, a podcast is the way. It's just a medium to be out there and talking.
I saw that subtle yet very on brand for you Disney play of The Mandalorian. This is the way. So I thought you did there, man.
It wasn't intentional, but
Well, but seriously, man, like I think that's so spot on with how, well, I think the first, so to kind of backtrack a little bit, what you talked about, like how you saw the podcast at Loop turning into this thing that could be repurposed for sales enablement, more or less. And not, yeah, like you said, I can attest to that because I was on the sales team at Loop at that time using it and it worked wonders. And that was like that idea of repurposing content, starting with a video or audio really came to me back when Wistia, the video platform, like they started talking about it. Like they created a conference and just kind of talking about like how the future of content and B2B SaaS is going to be where you're having these mini Netflix-esque type shows that then could be repurposed into multiple content pieces. So I think they were ahead of their time. And so I think you absolutely saw that shift. And then recently, you know, from My First Million podcast, Sean, like one of the co-hosts, Sean, he's talked about like, he doesn't really care about like getting these massive audiences. Like if he can get 100 of the top Fortune 500 executives listening to his content or following his newsletter, like that's way more valuable and has higher leverage for his business or for his network than it is for just trying to get as many views as possible. So yeah, like I think you're spot on. Like it doesn't really need to be massive in terms of scale.
we should double click on that. I think what you said there is actually incredibly important, where it's like, hey, be everything to someone rather than something to everyone. And like all of these podcasts were about that. So like let's use Loop as an example because we're both most familiar with it, is like Loop at the beginning, like when I first joined Loop, it was a returns platform that had a feature that none of the other returns platforms had. It was like instant exchanges. That was our bread and butter. Our sales team would rip that day in, day out, like, hey, come get instant exchanges. Problem with focusing on an individual feature is like everyone will copy it if it starts to take off. And it started to take off. Like we were going gangbusters. And everyone came in to copy it. But what we started to do, and it was very intentional, was like, hey, we need to speak very specifically to a very specific person. And our big message beyond like Loop as a product was returns shouldn't be a logistics tool. It's a marketing and a CX tool. So we started to like tailor everything we were saying to the marketing person or the customer success person, not to the finance person, not to the logistics person. And being able to like speak like that, again, who cares how many people come in and are subscribed to the podcast, but we had all this content that could speak to like very specific problems and very specific opportunities. And we were like, marketers, like, you need this. And they're like, yes, we need this, but something's standing in your way. And they're like, yeah, like I'm going to have to go through finance. And we started to have all this content to start to like bring the walls down from finance and give them everything they needed to like arm themselves for that conversation. So all the content that you put out there is all about like doing that for a very specific person.
Yeah. Well, on that note, like going back to creating like a GTM motion and building your playbook on the fly, especially like now I think you're either still in your first 90 days at Intelligence or you just passed it. Like how do you communicate to the executive team, or most likely the CEO is usually who we're working with when we're building out the marketing, or how do you communicate to them what the podcast or whatever the first initial content investment you're going to be doing is going to drive quick wins? Because it's hard to say like, hey, in 12 months, we're going to have this much revenue or this many leads coming from our content or whatever our strategy is, right? But you have to show something. So like, how do you navigate that conversation specifically around like going back to like the podcast? And I know the podcast is not the end all be all. It's just like something that you found and it's consistently been iterated on. So how do you communicate and talk about that narrative to your C-suite?
If someone's listening who's like trying to like go convince someone and it's like your first time and I have, how do I want to word this? Because of the track record, I think it's a little easier for me to pitch some of these things because it's like, oh, if it's worked before and like we're going to go do it again, then like history would say this is a good idea. So like there's a little bit, I might be skipping some things when I talk about this, but I think like the biggest thing you said, hey, how, like where are the leads going to come from on this? And like, is it going to be quick? No. Like I would say that content is almost never going to be a direct, like I create content and therefore I get leads. That's like, again, when we go back in time, that's a dated playbook of like, hey, I'm going to put a quote lead magnet together and get people to register, give me their email address and like, hey, here's the content, trade your email for it. And then we're going to either, if we're like going for more of like a self-serve, we'll do some sort of drip campaign. And if we're higher touch, then we'll give that list to the sales team and they'll be able to go work it. That doesn't really work anymore. Like people are really hesitant to give their emails for anything because they know that's going to happen. So I would say it's not going to be quick. And the way I always frame this when I am like talking to C-suite or whoever is like in control of like saying yes to this is content is going to be a slow burn. It is like renewable fuel. Like we're going to make investments in it and it's going to grow versus like paid advertising and some of those like growth hacks we were talking about are more fossil fuels. Like they will burn quick and they will burn out though. So we'll find ways to like get the quick wins, but we're going to be building this sustainable thing over time. And the way to talk about it is like, this is particularly important in SaaS is you see an ad that's like, this is the best way to do X thing. And you're seeing that ad like cold. You've never heard of this company. You've never seen anything from them. Like the chances of you engaging with a direct response ad for a SaaS company is like near zero. And everyone can try to find these ways of like spending. I talk to brands all the time. They're like, we can't make paid ads work. And it's not like I used to be of the assumption that like paid ads don't work in SaaS. Vermont taught me otherwise. Like we ripped paid ads at Vermont and like they were extremely effective. But this kind of gets to why they're effective. It's like there's a great foundation and brand awareness at Vermont. Like everyone has seen or heard or interacted with someone who is talking about Vermont. And those ads just become like the quick way to get in the door. It's like, oh yeah, true. I'm going to click that ad and I'm going to go engage with this. So all of this content is like getting out there into the market and making people both problem aware and solution aware, where a paid ad is probably just making someone solution aware, but you're doing nothing to help educate around that problem. Again, from the loop example. So the way you talk about this is you're building all of this content to build that problem awareness and solution awareness at the same time, get it through multiple people at your organization so that you can then layer on paid ads or some of these, like maybe even a lead magnet. Like I think it's dated, but probably could work again. Layer these other things on where it's like, yeah, I know of these guys. I know what they do. I'm going to interact with that. So slow burn, invest in it, but you're using it as a way to, I don't know. I think the best way to talk about it's like it's a proving ground. A lot of times I'll be like, I think that this line's going to work. And then I'll use it in content and I'll use it on social and like, oh, people are interacting with that. They're liking that. Okay, that's going to shape how I talk about things on the website. It's going to shape how we create our ads. Like it's all just experimentation. And again, for me, a podcast is the easiest way for me to experiment. But for you, it's probably a newsletter, or for someone else, it might be like written, like more written content or whatever. But just like find something, try it over and over again. Make sure when you're talking to that C-suite person that they know this is going to be a slow play, and you're doing it so that you can layer these other things on later. Not that like, oh, this podcast, this newsletter is going to be like direct lead creation.
What's interesting is like, I was reading a book that was co-written by Christopher Lochhead, and he wrote the book Snow Leopard. And in that book, he makes a call out to a specific stat from, I think it was Content Hacker. It said the number one outsourced effort from B2B marketers is creating content. I think it was like 86% of marketers do that. And so I guess like, why are marketers outsourcing content? Like, why, if that's such a heavy driver, especially for startup companies that don't have the ability to do paid ads or a very small budget to do that, like, why are we outsourcing our content, which seems to be the number one kind of like foundational thing, that then gets layered into all the other things that we repurpose for sales, for enablement? So I'm just curious, like, what's your take on that? Why are we doing that?
I think people have a tendency to outsource things that they either don't understand or don't have time for. It falls into one of those two camps. And I think like in content, it's actually a little bit of both. In B2B SaaS, most founders skew more like technical or product oriented than they do skew like marketing or sales oriented. And I think like the more marketing and sales oriented people have no problem kind of jumping into the content arena and like putting themselves out there because they've had to do it for so long. So I think the reason that people end up outsourcing it is like, oh, I'm not a videographer. I'm not a writer. So like I need to go have someone do that for me. The problem with that is like you are conflating like the build versus like the substance. Is everyone, like the founders and people who are deep in it, they know the story and they know the stories to tell. So don't outsource like content creation. I think it's fine to outsource like video editing, like, hey, have the podcast and outsource the video editing or like creating the clips or something like that, versus like, hey, just go outsource content creation. Because like in the early days, you need consistency. And I see this a lot. Like I actually think that working with like a content creation agency, I'm trying to think like like a Verbatim or a Compound, or like two agencies in the B2B space, or at least in like the Shopify ecosystem, who are popular. Those are great for getting going because it helps with consistency. It keeps you honest. It's like, I'm going to post something, I'm going to create something every single day. The thing is, you do hit a point where the consistency isn't as important as the quality anymore, where it's like, again, if we go back to that loop example of like, this is for marketers, this is for CX, like there's very specific storylines that we want to be creating. It's hard for outsourced people to like be as passionate and have that understanding and being able to look for hypocrisies in what you're creating or inconsistencies that you want to like pull that back in. So I think people do it to get to consistency and like faster creation, because it is faster to do that than to invest in it yourself. But I think it's good on a very like short-term horizon, but it really starts to decline in its effectiveness as you get sharper and have like a better understanding of what this is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you nailed it right there. I mean, for me, what I've kind of had this reflection for the past few years is like, I feel like somebody who's this is their marketer, whether it's in demand gen or whatever. Mostly I feel like, I don't want to offend people, but like usually it's demand gen. I feel like it's mostly just your project manager. Like you're just setting up a campaign, outsourcing it, running a few ads, and like, that's it. And I feel like because you outsource the content creation, like you're saying, like those people are not the founders. They're not in the weeds. They're not having the customer conversations to then have a point of view. And I think that to me is what I've really aligned and resonated, especially for your content, is like, you're so close to the customer. For the past 10 years that I've, being in e-commerce, like you're constantly talking to the customer, the marketer, the e-com manager, whoever it is. And so you have the point of view mixed in with like your guys' product, and then you can actually go speak and it resonates. And therefore you have the idea. And then, like you said, you can then outsource the other elements that you necessarily don't have the skills on, which, by the way, I think I totally agree with. But I think for me, I think the pressure for many marketers, why they don't have that POV is probably because they're getting too much pressure on like, we need to get pipeline and inbound leads now. And so we need to do the old playbook, which is generating as much content as possible and hope that that works, when really it's not the volume game. It goes back to what you said, is like that specific audience and being their everything versus just kind of being a for everybody else. I think I forgot exactly the word to use, but there's something along that, like that framework you said.
Yeah, it's marrying the store, like your product, with what the market wants. And like, listen, like at the end of the day, it really just comes down to like attention is the currency out there right now. Like, how do I get attention? I can get attention by posting six things a day, every day for 6 months. Like that's attention grabbing. I'm not saying it's necessarily good, but like that is a way to break through the noise. So like all that today in marketing, all that really matters is like how good are you at grabbing attention and breaking through what currently exists out there. So like everything we're talking about right now probably doesn't matter for someone who's starting right now. The thing that does matter for someone starting right now is like, how am I going to go differentiate in how I'm getting out there? Like create, like one thing I want to do, and like maybe this comes out in like the next month or so, is like I want like on the street game shows. Like I want B2B SaaS to be feeling more kind of like a consumer product, because like people buy the way they buy, and it doesn't matter if I'm buying gum or if I'm buying software. Like people buy on emotion, they don't buy on logic. So like don't get it conflated. Like emotion, solution, then I rationalize my decision with logic. So as you're creating all this content, don't skew logic heavy, because like that only is helpful for people who have already decided they want your thing and they're rationalizing it. So like if you only create in the logic arena, you are capped by how many people already have done everything on the other side and are ready to buy. There's all this like emotion building and again attention grabbing that has to happen so that you can pull people through that entire journey.
Ooh, that's good. If you're up for it, like let's kind of jam a little bit on how you're doing that with positioning for intelligence. Like I remember we were having a conversation recently where you're talking about like how, the initial person who's normally done A/B testing, and this is kind of like give a little riff and high level elevated pitch about intelligence, but you guys are in the process of trying to get somebody else into the conversation. So that requires new positioning, that requires, getting their attention, whether that's through emotion or logic, right? Like I'd love for you to kind of like break down how you are thinking through, what are the questions, what are the hurdles that you have right now as you're building that positioning?
So to riff quickly on like IntelliGems versus what's out there. So I think it's kind of similar to what we were seeing at Loop, where it's like there's this established category and now, hey, someone's going to come out of this category to elevate it. And if you think about like a lot of people who are thinking about IntelliGems right now, they're probably like, oh, it's a testing tool. And a testing tool puts you into a category of like conversion rate optimization. So testing and CRO, go type that into the Shopify App Store. You're going to get 300 tools that are going to help you with testing or CRO to some extent. What we want to be focused on is we want to be focused on operational excellence and profitability. I can't pay my bills with conversion rate improvements. I can pay my bills and reinvest in my company's growth with profits that I'm generating. So, hey, we need to be putting forth profit per visitor, profitability, get your cogs into all of these tests, because like, hey, you need to make sure at the end of the day, you're choosing the most profitable path forward based on a gajillion different inputs that might be there. So, hey, conversion rate was like the old way of doing it. Profit rate or profit rate optimization is the new way of doing it, and being really focused on that operational excellence, because conversion rate optimization was like, hey, I'm ripping ads and people end up on my landing pages and I need to be as efficient as possible. Old ways advertising excellence, new ways operational excellence. Old ways conversion rate, new way is all about profit. So how do we elevate this? And like that's where the podcasts, and like I actually just have a new, maybe we can link to it, is a new podcast or like show that's only happening once a quarter. I'm doing it with a customer of IntelliGems and old customer of Loop, Ben Perkins. We're calling it Quarters and Cents, and we're just going through his P&L. Like, hey, here is every line item, what happened and why, and what are we going to try to do next quarter to improve that? I don't necessarily want to focus on like every individual thing that IntelliGems can do. I want IntelliGems to be viewed by those people who care about operational excellence, those people who care about profitability, bottom line versus top line. And like, I want to galvanize that group of people to have all the content and be armed to have those conversations and like find other like-minded people to rally around. And like, that's what it's all about right now on the positioning front is, again, elevate and go after like a different type of person. And that type of person is a little tough for us right now because like who owns that at a e-com business right now? There isn't really like a title or anything. It's more of a feeling. So like that's why the content's so important. It's like I can't target an ad to someone who cares about profitability, someone who views themselves as an excellent operator. Like these are not things I can target.
That's so good, man. So you touched on a few things that I want to dive into. One is like this old way, right? Like CRO and just like growth at all costs. And essentially, like I still think there's a lot of e-com people that are doing that. And I know because I asked that in a recent like offsite event. But then now this new way of like, I like that wording, maybe you're testing that right now, but like profit rate optimization sounds great, sounds cool. But I would imagine there is a new element for you of learning about that, right? So like not only as a new head of marketing at a new company, not new company, but like you're building the marketing division. It's like you have to go learn that. At the same time, you have to go educate and communicate this to a potentially new person, or not even necessarily a new person, but like a group of people in a company that are not used to thinking about this. So like, I guess for you, how did you start that? Like, is it more so just like consuming and understanding? I think it maybe goes back to like you understanding the product, but that's a lot of weight, right? You're weighing a lot of hats to do 0 to 1 while you're teaching yourself. So maybe walk us through a little bit like how you've been learning that.
Yeah, I'm definitely, as we said, like 10 years into this. I'm going back to my like school days. So I went to school for like business administration. So back into my finance classes and my accounting classes and like just pulling things from the back of my brain, like EBITDA and like all this stuff. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know all these things. Let me just like brush the dust off of it. I think like the best way to kind of get an understanding of these is like, I think what's the saying? A smart person knows they don't know. A dumb person doesn't know they don't know. Is like, I don't know. So how am I going to go figure these things out? Customer calls, I think, are the best thing, whether it's Gong or Clary or whatever. Like your sales team, your success team is having these conversations every single day. Make sure they're recorded and like be able to jump in there. And one thing, like almost the like day one for me is, okay, who is going to be my person on the sales side of things and who's going to be my person on the post sale side of things? And like, I need like my ride or die homie in both of those departments. And then it's like, Drew, anytime you hear something interesting, flag the call for me. And then your question is going to be, well, Alex, what's interesting? And I'm like, I don't know, man. You tell me what's interesting. Like, and then I try to like put a little bit of guidance to it. It's like, that call went extremely well. That's interesting. Like, let's talk about it. That call was a dumpster fire. That's also interesting. Let's talk about it, because that starts to create these like extremes. And I want to know, like, when someone comes in and hates what we're selling, why? When someone comes in and loves what we're selling, why? Everything in the middle can probably be distilled into like, okay, we can push someone to one of these poles. And it's like, let's get people to love us. And like, hey, some people will hate it. Like, you know, at Loop, like some people did hate us. Like if we ended up in a conversation with like a very logistics oriented person, and we're like, this is all this great stuff. And they're like, I don't want that. And we're like, okay, well then like, this isn't the solution for you. Like you need to be able to create these people who are like obsessed and like fanatical about it, and people who hate you. So yeah, get into the, like, find it on the post sale and pre-sale side, listen to those calls, see what customers are saying. And like the best marketing language is just use things that are already being used. Everyone wants to talk about category creation and like build up something from scratch. And like, to some extent, I am trying to do that at IntelliGems, but like, I also need somewhere to start. And like we said at the beginning, it's like testing, CRO, these are understood things. Let's use that as a starting point and then go from there, rather than like, let's abandon that completely and go build up something completely new. That's really hard to do.
Oh, that's so good, man. Like the pre-sale, post-sale homie. Like I love that. Definitely still in that. And like, I think that's so true. And for me, it's always been, and man, call recordings. I don't know how many times being on the sales side, like, especially my managers, like they never watched. It's so funny how we pay for software like Gong. And like, there are many sales managers that don't even go in and read them or listen to them. But that's been my go-to for sure, especially when I'm trying to understand existing customers and like listening to merchant success, how they talk about certain problems and navigate once they're onboarded. So I love that. The ride or die, homie. That's dope.
You're not at the top of the list, like Gong and like most of these things like show like number of recordings watched. Like if I'm not in the top 10%, like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, dude. Okay. So as we're heading into this new era of building these GTM playbooks, especially with like the rise of AI, but like for a better lack of term, because I don't want to sound so cliche. Like, do you have like 1 to 3 tools that you're starting to either like that are in your tool belt that you're using, but then also like, is there 1 to 2 tools that you're kind of testing out to see that can help you, whether that's in content creation, helping you extract customer insight, or just like testing certain things?
Yeah. So let's start on like the AI side and because like, yeah, whatever cliche, but I think the interesting thing is what we were saying before about like, hey, our job is to grab attention. AI and different tools are making it easier than ever for anyone to be a creator of anything. Like you're seeing people build like basic apps by just like prompting the right way and having tools build something for them. You can use like one of the tools I'll shout out is like I use Riverside for recording podcasts, but the reason I use it is not because of like it's the best recording tool out there. It's like all of the post production that it gives me. Like I used to pay at Loop, I had a video like AI person who would clean up the audio for me and help me pull the clips and like create intro music. I can do all that with AI now. That's insane. Like I don't need that person. I can build my own music. I like all of the audio comes out crisp as hell. I just removed a person from like the workflow of this. So AI is going to make all those things easier. So it's just like, hey, you're going to be able to reduce your headcount or like the amount of contractors that you need to do certain things. So like, again, focus on what's going to break through the noise. How do I tell like my unique point of view? And then use AI or outsource to like make that happen and just like focus on what you're brilliant. Now, the tools, Riverside, I already hit on, is one of my faves. Any of the call recording tools are getting like super sophisticated on like the summaries that come out of it. So we use Clary at IntelliGems, like whether it's Gong or whatever. Even these like note taker apps that you can pull in for like personal note taking, it's insane the quality that comes out of like those. Like, hey, give me the summary of that last conversation, even if it didn't record the call, just like to print out like, hey, here's what happened. That's really good. Like you can probably come out of this conversation, have AI rip and be like, these are the 3 most important things you guys talked about. And you'll look at it and be like, yeah, 2 of the 3 of those are like exactly it, but there's something else in here. And then the last is like, just use ChatGPT, use Claude, use something, because like I have not gotten to a point where I think like those are building content just by like, hey, let's start from scratch and go. But what they are fantastic at is like I have a concept, I have an idea. Let me put like let me dump raw thoughts and help me like either expand or reduce. Because like sometimes you'll have an idea and be like, I need to turn this into like a bigger webinar or like a full presentation. Sometimes you'll have an idea and be like, I just want this to be like a quick hitter. I need a one-liner. I need some copy for the site. I need something quick hitting. And I think like, again, Claude, ChatGPT doesn't matter. Like all of those are getting really good at like, help me get better with the thought I have. I haven't really found success being like, hey, here's like some topics, like be original for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for me, so I feel like we should just be dropping links to affiliate links for Clary and for we talk about these, but yeah, to kind of go back on some of the things, man, when I was an AE in my past roles, a lot of my time was the transcribing of the notes that I had, my shorthand notes, into full thoughts that I understood what that meant to then help customer success and put it into HubSpot or whatever. That took up so much time. And for me, I would say one of the biggest game changers was, it's called granola.ai. Man, I'm telling you what, like that right now is like probably one of my top used apps overall. Like just for myself alone, like in my consultancy business, but then also if I was working at a SaaS company, like IntelliGems, like I'd be using that like hands down all the time. Because it just turns your shorthand notes into full-fledged sentences and bullet points. Game changer. But I think what you're doubling down on, for at least what I'm hearing from you, is I don't think AI, at least for right now, I don't think it should be coming up with original ideas. However, if you feed it a bunch of raw material or other fully fleshed out ideas that you guys have had, whether that's call transcriptions, whether that's original posts or thought leadership articles that you truly believe in, right? And you dump that in as context, then that can extrapolate, right? What you said, expand on those ideas. And then because you have a POV up in the market, because you guys are constantly talking to customers and building the product, you will then be able to pick and choose what you like and then like narrow in on that. And so like for me, that's been a game changer in terms of like how I think about creating work. I don't look at AI. There's elements of AI that are going to help me do more work, but I don't necessarily see, and I'm curious like what your take is on this. I don't see AI saving me time in actually doing work. I actually think I'm just going to redistribute the time that I was doing this administrative stuff or just the basic general like messy stuff and redistributed that into, well, what is my take? What is actually the clarifying thought? Or like, can I spend more time talking to customers, which then can extract out those knowledge or those little nuggets of wisdom. So like, I don't see it saving time. I see it necessarily allowing me to invest more time into the more impactful things, which is the ideas and the angles.
I guess like maybe what I would say to that is like, are those one and the same? Where it's like it's saving me time and it's not necessarily like, oh, that's freeing up hours in my week, but it is putting like my brain to the things I care more about doing.
Yes.
So I like that's essentially how I'm using it. Like even things like, oh, I have an idea for like what this podcast art should look like. In the past, I'd like take my marker out, grab my graph paper, and do like a real fat thumb, like shitty sketch on something, and go to a designer be like, does this look like anything that you could do something with? And they're like, yeah, sure. And now it's like, oh no, I have this idea. Let me like go prompt AI to like go build a first pass at this. I'm like, yeah, this is close, but like, let's go from here. So yeah, like, I think I more or less agree with you. I'm using AI to do more of the like busy work that like, again, like a podcast episode used to take me like 2 hours after I had it recorded to have it like ready to distribute. I was just telling Kim the other day that like when we record in IntelliJams and I go to like get it ready, it's like 15 minutes. Hit the AI producer, it cleans up the audio. Hey, go find 10 clips from here based on like these three topics, pulls the clips out, puts them into my brand. I look at them and I'm like, this one's good, this one's not. Okay, here's how we're going to build a story around it. I want to talk about these things, goes into ChatGPT. What's the actual message going to be based on like the thought that I want to pull through from this. So like I've gone from 2 hours to 15 minutes. What am I going to do with all of that saved time? I want to be listening to more customer calls. I want to be putting myself in positions where I can learn something new rather than just like continuing to build forward. It's like, I call it putting it on rails is like, hey, I've done something enough times where now it's on rails and AI can help me with like it being on rails. And now I can go invest time into what that next thing is going to be.
Yeah. No, it's so good. I mean, you talking about leveraging AI for busy work. I just recently wrote an article about this in the newsletter about like how marketers need to do more deep work and create space in their calendar to actually focus in on the stuff that's going to matter. And for you, it's what you just said. So that reminds me of, I was still at Loop and you, I think, moved on to Repeat. And I was talking with you about, as I was building out the 0 to 1 playbook for the agency partner program at Loop Returns, my conversations with these agencies was like, they are referring their clients, but it was a reactive conversation where the brand, their client was coming to the agency saying like, hey, who do you have for returns? And then because Loop and the content we were creating, they thought about us and because we were talking, reaching out to them. But I really wanted to create this proactive in conversation where the client that, the agency was actually coming to their clients and saying like, hey, what are you doing for returns? How does this fit into the growth and retention conversation that you mentioned earlier? And you gave me like a really good model to reflect on and kind of build, which was, I'm going to murder it, but I would love if you can kind of talk on a little bit, because I think it talks about, for me, this conversation right now and this process that you walked me through, that required me to do the deep work. It required me to think through, okay, what am I going to create to grab the attention for these agencies to then think about returns differently? And that was like the concept of like a three-piece suit or three different types of suits. So maybe you can kind of like break that down a little bit if you remember it.
Yeah, so I tend to use the suit analogy a lot when people, again, the GTM like generalist is like you're getting started on anything. There's a tendency to be like, I have a very specific thing I need to go do. So how am I going to build that specific thing? So in the suit analogies, it's like, oh, I'm going to this very fancy event. I need a tuxedo. So you invest in a tuxedo, you go to the event, it works, and then you get invited to your buddy's wedding. And now a tuxedo probably looks out of place. It had a very specific job to do, but my ability to like reuse that in the next situation was very poor. Versus like, hey, if I just had a black suit, I probably could have used it in both of those situations. It might not have been A plus in either, but it would have worked in both situations. And then it's like, hey, that's like my one thing. And like, what do I want to do next? Again, don't go to something very specific. Start to think about like, hey, what's another kind of like general thing I can use that is going to maximize my value in multiple situations? So if you have a gray suit, a black suit, and a navy suit, you have three suits that you can now mix and match for pretty much any occasion or anything you need to go to. And you have so many combinations that no one's going to know that you only have three suits because the black works with the gray. I can just use the gray. I can just use the navy jacket and like dress it down. You now have like all these pieces to go build really cool things without needing to be like, I have this very specific problem and I'm going to invest the next week into this very specific problem. It's like, no, I built the foundation that I can just shuffle around and use when I need it.
Oh, that was so good, man. When you told me that for the first time, like it immediately clicked because I knew what I had to go do. And for me, it was like, okay, what is the first entry point? What's my first suit to get in the door to these agencies to start thinking about Loop differently? Because, for agencies that we worked with within Shopify, it was like most of them did design and development or they did marketing. And so a lot of the design and development agencies, they didn't touch the back of the house with returns. And so what I thought about is like, okay, what's going to be my suit that makes me feel like I'm in place, which was how do we talk about returns that impact the PDP and other elements of site navigation for these brands, which then essentially end into better conversions and just like less returns and more retention in terms of repeat purchases. And so that's when I built and came up with the idea of the return optimization report. So it was just like, hey, I would go to the agencies and say, hey, most likely we're working with, similar brands. Let me go do a return analysis. I'll pull data of similar brands that are to your clients, and I'll show you how they're performing. You just need to tell me who your clients are. I'll go do and see if they have an existing return solution. Many times they didn't. And so I could see the performance gap from brands that didn't have a return solution that then transferred to Loop. And so that allowed me to kind of build this playbook where it took a lot of upfront building of that, but then I could repurpose that into my introductory calls with agencies where it's like, hey, I did this report. And so it fed itself and turned itself into its own flywheel. And so I just thank you so much for that, because I've taken that framework of the suit analogy and applied that into, the other roles that I've been in. So I just got to thank you again for that. So.
And like, again, for this conversation, the GTM generalist is, as a generalist, a problem comes up, let me go solve that problem. But if you think in like, again, that suits thing, or like there's probably three things that I can really be focused on and building at any given time. How do I use these three things to go solve as many of those problems as possible? Again, it might not be that I have like the A+ solution to that problem that comes in the door, but I have a B solution with what I'm building right now. And I'm able to keep 3 hats on instead of 17 hats and like actually make meaningful progress on 3 fronts. I would argue like fewer are better, like one, like, hey, that one thing might be across a bunch of different functions and a bunch of different roles, but like I'm focused on this because I believe this is the best path forward. And then I add another one and then like up to 3. And if you're going past 3, cut something and then add the next one on, because you will spread yourself too thin to make any sort of meaningful change if you go beyond like 3 focuses.
Yeah. And I think that, so to tie that and kind of wrap it up, it's like, not only do you have to go make that decision, and I'm sure you would probably loop in your pre-sale and post-sale person, right? But also communicating to your CEO of like, hey, here's these 3 plays, these 3 pieces or, strategies that we're going to implement. And here's what I'm hoping, here's the hypothesis that we have. We're going to run with it. And like, I'm going to report back on the data and be like, Cool. And many times what I found is like the CEO, because they're mostly a technical person, like they trust you, right? That's the reason why they hired you, right? And if you are showing, hey, this is working or it's not working, here's how we're going to tweak it. We're going to try this different play now. I think that's all you can do as a marketer, which just gives, for me at least, it gives me more confidence going into my role of building out the playbook as a generalist. So yeah, I think that's just been so crucial for me. I'm curious, like, how have you navigated that conversation by explaining as well to your CEO?
So another one of like kind of like my big tenets is I call creating windows. Some people say work in public. It's hard to work in public because like not everyone cares as deeply about what you're doing as you do, but like always leave a window so people passing by can look in. And it's like if I ever wanted to stop and stare through the window and watch what Alex is doing or watch what Drew's doing, that exists. Whether that's like a Slack channel or a Notion page, like document all of your decisions and like what you're doing and your thought process. Because like when you say I'm going to do X, people are now evaluating X with zero historical context. But like if you provide all of the inputs in your decision making, it's hard to say like, is that the best thing? Yes or no. But like, did you make a good decision? It's easier to show that you did if you've kind of been public with like, oh, I know this, here's the sound clip, here's like the data, here's where this is based off of. It's a lot easier to have that conversation with the CEO or literally anyone. And sometimes they don't even ask because like I was having a conversation with my CEO the other day and he's like, I look at what you're putting into Slack and the updates that you're giving. And he's like, I don't really have any questions like right now. If I do, because I went and asked, I'm like, what are your big questions right now? And it's like, you're being very transparent about what you're up to and what you care about. If I have questions, I'll ask you, but like keep doing what you're doing because like it's reducing the amount of questions that I have.
Ooh, love that, dude. I think we should end there. That's great. I appreciate you so much, man. Where should we plug you with, man? LinkedIn, IntelliGems, podcast. What do you want, man?
Yeah, I am on Twitter at AlexMCEA. I'm not as active there. Come follow me on LinkedIn. You can search Alex McEachern, MCEACHERN. In terms of plugs for IntelliGems right now, head over to the IntelliGems YouTube. We got 2 series that are going. We've got IntelliJams, which Drew has mentioned a few times. It's quick hitters on what's going on in the world of IntelliGems with our product and the company. And then now we have our new episode of Quarters and Cents, which is like a 1-hour deep dive into a P&L once a quarter. So you got your quick hitters and your longer form content.
Awesome. All right,
Good.
everybody. Peace.